that fear and that shutdown that's going on is actually going to be the worst way to go for what's about to take place over the next 50, 60, 100 years. And if we don't grow up and face it as an ongoing worldwide situation, there's going to be more wars, there's going to be more land grabs, there's going to be more famines and starvations. And we need to have an intelligent overall conversation about how we address it on a worldwide level, instead of this everyone battening down the hatches and closing their borders and just looking after themselves, because, you know, history has proved that that doesn't work.
Hello and welcome. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Janie Mac as we take a communication perspective on the work she does with the Refugee Community Kitchen to serve nourishing meals to displaced people. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using this communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Janie Mac. Janie is a co-founder of the Refugee Community Kitchen, which is a volunteer-run organization that has been serving hot, nourishing meals to displaced people in northern France and the UK since 2015. This conversation is the last in our series on migration, and it's very different than the other conversations we've had in this series so far, which is mostly focused on immigration, specifically in the United States. The Refugee Community Kitchen serves displaced people and refugees in northern France and the UK. So for me, this is still a story about migration, about the movement of people, and how those of us who are fortunate enough not to have to migrate, not to be displaced by things like war and climate change, can show up for those who do. And Janie's going to talk today not only about how we could show up, but also why we should, and really why we have to take care of each other in this way. So let's finish the conversation with Janie. Hi, Janie. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Hi, Abbie. No, I'm really pleased to be here.
Really looking forward to this conversation, and let's jump right in. Can you start by introducing yourself, and then you can move on to introducing the Refugee Community Kitchen in that as well?
Right. Hi, I'm Janie Mac. I'm a founder, one of the 4 founders of Refugee Community Kitchen. We set up in 2015 in response to the humanitarian crisis that was happening across the Channel in northern France. We set up in 2015. And so that's nearly a decade that we've been doing it. That was not sort of on our horizon to be there that long. You know, when we, it all started as an idea. There were 4 friends, and we decided that we wanted to go over to Calais and cook a meal. And we're still there. So that's sort of us, really. I mean, I can go into it a lot deeper, what we're doing, of course. I just want to say here, this is how 4 normal, average people, maybe not average, but maybe 4 normal people can go about and do something that becomes actually very impactful and a huge project that we didn't expect. So it's ordinary people doing amazing things.
Yeah. So that's interesting to me that you kind of set the larger context for how the Refugee Community Kitchen began. What about the personal context? What was it in your own experiences that made you feel the need to do this work?
I'm very much not into establishment. I find it very deceitful. I find there's always ulterior motives in a capitalist society, which I don't believe is good for us in any way. Some would frame me as an anarchist, but that comes with lots of various connotations all over the world. I went over to northern France before we set up the kitchen with a group to take over a load of bicycles so the refugees could get around to their appointments and had a means to move around in the local area. So I was already involved with doing alternative situations to help people and to just be part of a network and joining the dots without having to rely on the authorities, which were obviously not in place at the time. So my background is very much involved in, I was involved in Occupy. I was involved in, we set up a group called Green and Black Cross where we monitor the police in demonstrations. I was very much already involved in a sort of people movement before the crisis arrived at our doorstep. So it wasn't something that was monumental at the time for me. It's just something that I did because that's what you do. I'm in service to the human, I'm in service to my fellow person. Whether I like them or not is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. It's about us working together for all to be able to live a satisfying life.
Yeah. What was it that led you to want to create a kitchen and serve food and have that be the center of it?
So Sam, one of the other founders, is a chef. And so there's 4 founders. There's myself as an activist. There's Sam, that's a chef. There's Steve, that organises events and festivals. And then there's Paula, who also works with events and cooking, and she's a doula. So we've been friends for like 30 odd years. And it was Sam that actually phoned me up one day and said, I want to come and cook a meal. And then we went over in October. And by the 1st of December, we had built a field kitchen and we were serving our first meal.
Wow.
It was all pretty full on.
Yeah. Yeah. And here you are almost a decade later, still doing it.
Yeah. Served over 3 million meals. We're still doing 1,000 meals a day. Yeah. It doesn't look like it's going to, as much as the authorities want to hide it or ignore it or not make it official that there's a situation or whatever, it's there and it's not going away. And people are, all these people are fleeing war and famine and torture, lots of reasons that people are there. And to help people on their journey is something that just is really obvious to us to do.
Yeah. How are you able to connect with? What is the language you use for the community you serve? Refugees, displaced people?
Both.
Okay.
No, it's usually displaced people. I mean, refugees is something that most people recognize as a word. Mm-hmm. More so displaced people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, displaced people that don't have first world privileges.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the only difference between them and us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So because you're not using the systems that are in place because they're not working, how do you get in contact with the people you serve? How do they find out about you once they arrive?
So it's pretty much word of mouth on the ground. We have, what happens is we built a field kitchen. And then when we realized that we were going to be there quite a while, we did a big fundraiser and we built a big, massive professional kitchen there. So what we do is we cook during the day and then we have distribution teams and they go out to the various communities because the way it's set up in Calais is, and Dunkirk, it's community groups. Obviously, people join together with a familiarity that they know, and it would be language and customs, community culture. So they group together in various different camps. So what we do is we have 3 or 4 different distribution points and we go as close to the living areas as possible and set up outreach services there for people to come and get their food. So it's word of mouth between the people living there to come and get food. They're shown where to go and that's pretty much how it works. We do have communication with community groups if we need to move. So what happens regularly in Calais is the authorities will close off areas where we're doing distributions, or they're very good at placing boulders everywhere in Calais. So where people service or are camping or whatever, you'll turn up one day and they'll just be like huge boulders. They're just the machinery they use to put them in place is, it's incredible that they want to do it like that, but. So we do notify service users when we're going to move or how it's changing, and it's all about communication. We have leads that go out with our distribution, and they will know, they've been with us some time, and they will get to know people within the community to pass on information. It's a very strange place, Calais, because officially it doesn't exist, the camps, so
Mm,
no major charities will go and work there because they're not allowed to.
wow.
So it's this very desperate situation where it's small, local and UK NGOs that are dealing with it all.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's a very, very strange place.
Yeah.
I've never seen so many fences and boulders. And I mean, if you were to do a Google Earth and look at Calais and you look at their green spaces, so many of their green spaces are just full of rocks now.
Wow.
That's just to try and keep people. And they have this system of, they just move people on every 24 hours. So they're constantly, and it's not necessarily an eviction. Sometimes they do evictions, but what they do is they get up really early in the morning and they go and wake people up out of their tents and get them to move and disrupt the camps. And it's exhausting for everybody. Logistically, it's exhausting for us because we're forever having to find new locations or find where people have moved to get new locations, but exhausting for the refugees. I mean, they don't sleep properly. They're being moved on all the time. These situations are barbaric, actually. There's no compassion there whatsoever. And the cruelty that we hear about is, there were stories, well, not stories, they were just the truth of it, so when people sleep in their little tents or they have little shelters that they've built, they'll put their shoes outside and this, that, and the other. And they'll get up in the morning and all their shoes will have gone, or one shoe will have gone, and things like that. And it's like the next minute you've got 200 people that need a pair of shoes because the authorities, the CRS, which is the force that they use, would have thought it really funny or clever to take all the single shoes. And, it's just mindless sort of wearing people down constantly. But the thing is about us is the sole purpose of Refugee Community Kitchen is to serve hot, nourishing meals. And we try and make them culturally familiar to those on their journey. We want people to know that not all hope is lost. Some people have found Calais, on their journey is one of the hardest places that they've ever been. And this is like coming from war-torn areas, and they get to Calais and they're just like, hope has gone, has just been stripped from them. And that's just in a first world country. That's really shocking that we treat people like that, So, we want people to know that we care, that not all hope is lost, that there's people there for them. And, our meals we want them to remind them of home or of a culture that they've had to leave behind and something that's familiar to them, that's not, the whole journey is very alien. So that's what we want. We want to make that sort of gesture and look after them in a physical way, that if they're coming and getting a hot, nourishing meal every day, then they can think about other things like going and registering to see if they can to stay or just function. So we serve lots of food in lots of different locations. And as I say, we've done over 3 million meals, and at the moment we're doing 1,000 meals a day. And we just have to be on, we've never had so many meetings in our life, logistics, order food, who's cooking, so we're all based on volunteers, rotas, logistics. It's just a constant changing situation. I mean, fundamentally, the cooking stays exactly the same, but everything around it is pretty changeable.
Yeah. You're starting to talk about it. Can you tell me more about the community part of the Refugee Community Kitchen and what you hope to provide beyond just food, or, what you provide as, like you're saying, a result of taking care of a meal for people?
Yeah. So it's interesting because we thought that, because since 2016, we also set up outreaches in London. So we have 7 outreaches on the streets in London. And when we first set up, we had this, we're going to build communities. We're going to, these people are going to come and work with us. And we had all these ideals, and that hasn't happened. But where the community has been created is amongst our volunteers, and really, really strong communities. And we've had over 20,000 volunteers come through the kitchens. And there's what we do is we have long-term volunteers that run the core of the kitchen, and then people come and volunteer. They can come for one day, a week, a month, and people do come for a couple of days at a time. And so the long-term volunteers run all the logistics for that, like prep leads, chef, distribution leads, managers, all that side of it. But what we've seen is the friendships that have grown from those times together, and how many of our volunteers have gone to set up kitchens all over the world from the skills that they've learnt in Refugee Community Kitchen. That was something that I just find that amazing, that, I had a volunteer, I did a checkout. So when volunteers are with us for a while, we always check in for obviously welfare and support. And then when they're leaving, we have a little checkout and see how they got on and if they've got any ideas about changing things. And it's always a constant renewal of things. And, something that might be suggested 3 years ago might not have worked, but then it could work tomorrow. So there's always this, So I was checking in with this girl, and she was really young. She was like 22, just finished university. And she was just like, I've just learned so much while I've been here. She's like, I've learned how to be a prep lead. I've learned quantities for doing, hundreds of kilos of rice. I've learned how to drive a forklift truck. I've learned how to, and she just listed this big list. And it's only when you get reminded about the skill set that you're creating with people, which makes them so much stronger, more positive, more able to go out and do projects themselves. And that part of it is just, there is this thing about hierarchy. A kitchen has a hierarchy. It's a kitchen, but it's about information. It's about knowledge. It's a knowledge hierarchy. Obviously, we're a charity, so we do have trustees and charities commission. But inside the kitchen itself, everybody can learn to be that person or to do that job. And it's about disseminating knowledge all the time, teaching people new skills, stepping up to learn how, when the chef turns around and he's making a meal for 1,000 people, breaking down how many litres of leeks and potatoes and carrots and, and working all that out. And it's that kind of disseminating the knowledge so people can learn how to do that is so important. So we're really big on training. Like I say, we have weekly meetings. We have a little meeting every morning to introduce everybody to each other, because there's constant change of, and a rundown of what the day is going to look like. So it's all about repeating and creating this information network so everybody knows what they're doing and everybody feels confident in what they're doing. And that's the beauty of the kitchen, and that's worked, and it's hard work. There's this very strange situation where you're in a kitchen with like-minded people, and it's fun, there's good music, you have these common interests and ideologies, and then outside of the warehouse there's this brutal world going on. And our volunteers have to deal with death, daily deaths with people in the channel, and then they're thinking, did I serve them their last meal? Did I know these people? If you're out distribution all the time, you most probably have met these people. So you have this really weird juxtaposition of this amazing environment full of love and care, and then you step out the door and there's this brutality, and that's really difficult for some people to negotiate those two different sides of the coin. And it's like sometimes I just look at our young volunteers in awe, in absolute awe, that they can be robust and resilient in that. And then sometimes I feel like phoning them up a year later and going, are you all right? How are you now? It's like, because obviously when we first started, it was friends, family, loads of people coming over, loads of energy and compassion, and we didn't have all those systems set up. But now we have lots of systems of welfare and caring and check-ins, and so sometimes I feel like going, oh, that first year, I can't even remember half the people. We didn't even know their names. People just turned up and were like, I'm here for a day. What do you want me to chop? And think about, the brutality that they saw and how they're dealing with all that and how we all deal with it. It's just like, it's not a nice place to be in. but it's also an amazing place to be in. And that's a very complex sort of situation for some people.
Yeah, as you're speaking, you're making me think of this idea that's really central to what it means to me, at least, to take a communication perspective and this emphasis on stories. And that is the way that many, many stories can coexist at once. And the, fancy language of that is pluralistic truths, that what is true for you, there's not one big capital T truth out there. There's this little T truth that each of us have, and they can all coexist next to each other. And that's so difficult for people to wrap their heads around sometimes if they're not practicing it, if it's not, if they're not exposed to, like you're saying, what your volunteers are exposed to, this really deep complexity of seeing all of this good, all of this compassion in the work that you're doing, and then also all of this suffering. And that's taking me back to what you referenced earlier, that the story that is being told by the institutions is simple or misleading, or I don't know exactly what word I'd put to it. You probably have a lot of great opinions and language on this.
Yeah, their stories fit their agendas.
Right. It's diminishing, and it's almost the story of non-existence. It's a non-story in a way, and so, the numbers that you're saying, how many meals you've served over the past 10 years, how many meals you serve a day. It's incredible that you can make 1,000 people, millions of meals, millions of people that you've served disappear through your stories.
Yeah. Well, we hear it all the time. We hear people go, "Oh, is it still happening?
Yeah.
Oh, are you still there?" Because all the, over here, it's all small boats, small boats, small boats. That's all you hear. It's the most awful rhetoric. And it's just like, well, those small boats have been somewhere before they got into the boats, and the surprise from people that we're still in Calais is quite shocking sometimes. It's and I understand that, we've just been through, the whole world has just been through a pandemic. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got wars going on. And I understand that some people find that very complex, too much going on.
Right.
But when it's so close to home, I find that inhumanity of ignorance is a big issue. It's a big issue, because that means that capitalist wheel has actually got so many people are so tightly wound up in, the rent is extortionate here, the cost of living crisis, the bills. People have to keep their head down, and they can't actually take in any more, because it would just tip the edge. They have a real knack of keeping things sort of just subdued here, just enough. You've just got enough money to pay the bills. You've just got enough money to function. You've just got enough money to live. And then if it tipped either way, things would change. So it's a very nuanced sort of balancing act that you're held at. So people don't have the capacity to take it all in, because their world would just fall apart.
Yeah.
And we're very good at that in Britain. That sort of subservient, sort of passive aggressive sort of population where, we get angry, but we just roll over again, because we've just got enough to hold on to. And they haven't taken away that much that we feel that we have to do anything about. So it's like survival mode. And it's a horrible way to keep people.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, I think, what I was wanting to get to with my point about that, like multiple stories existing, is that the instinct or the path that I would say serves the capitalist society, serves the systems, is for people to look at something very complex and go, "Ooh, I cannot deal with that. Let me just look away," and act like it's not there. Yeah. And that's such a disservice. You said the inhumanity of ignorance, I think was the word you used. Beautifully said. That makes so much sense to me. And so to me, what, like I said, like a communication perspective is about, what understanding that multiple stories can exist at the same time about, is like flexing that muscle, because it is a hard thing to do, to sit in the complexity of a lot of pain and suffering, and a lot of joy and love and compassion and hope. And it's so flexing that muscle of looking at the complexity, existing in it, being in the tension, and it's strengthening yourself so you can engage with it, because just looking away and acting like the world is simple because you need to believe that it is such a disservice to everybody.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, we also, like I said, we set up services in 2016 in London. So we thought initially that, the impact of refugees arriving in London and being homeless would impact the streets. And it didn't, because there were a lot of hotels and things. But now we have projects, and we thought we were going to be a service to rough sleepers, but that's a very small section of society that we actually serve. There's people that are homeless, that are couch surfing in hostels, but then there's people in food poverty. Then there's people that are lonely, people that have mental health issues, people that have addiction issues. So all of a sudden, our outreaches have this complex of we have this situation of all the ills that are wrong within our community that aren't being addressed. And you see it day in, day out, and loneliness is like a huge one. Some people come to our outreach just to talk to people, not necessarily to get food. And, and there's not one hat fits all. And whatever we do, and however society tries to, cost of living crisis, if we had a basic living income and then that lifted everybody out of poverty, if we had things like that in place, we'd still have people that would be going through crises at some point in their life. So they still need something to capture them. They still need a safety net, and the government or councils, they try to fix everything, but not fixing anything.
Yeah.
And then what happens is, they just want to, we'll try and sort that out. But there are things that aren't going to be sorted out. So we need to be there all the time, and, you could have been a successful business person for 20 years, and then you go through a divorce and a crisis, you lose your house, you find yourself living in your car and you can't eat. Mm-hmm. And you're coming to an outreach service for 6 months, and then you get your job again and you lift yourself up and you get back out again. There isn't a capture system for them within the system, because it's fluid and it's not permanent. So there's always going to have to be something like RCK on the streets to have a safety net to capture those people so they can have a hot, nourishing meal and sleep well that night, or just for their gut health and be able to, so a lot of mental health issues when people aren't eating properly and eating processed food. And, it's just the whole, it's just so complex.
Yeah.
There's no one fix all, but the fact is we're always going to be needed. And whether it be, the refugee crisis worldwide is not just war. I mean, they dress it up as war, but it's about land grabs because of climate change, and that's the climate movement of people on the move on the planet is only just starting. Mm-hmm. And if we don't address it as an international, worldwide situation instead of individual, everyone's shutting their borders, everyone's hunkering down, everyone's really getting paranoid, we're swinging to the right wing instead of we should be actually going the other way. People are closing their borders, and then it's just that fear and that shutdown that's going on is actually going to be the worst way to go for what's about to take place over the next 50, 60, 100 years. Mm-hmm. And if we don't grow up and face it as an ongoing worldwide situation, there's going to be more wars, there's going to be more land grabs, there's going to be more famines and starvations, and we need to have an intelligent overall conversation about how we address it on a worldwide level, instead of this everyone battening down the hatches and closing their borders and just looking after themselves, because history has proved that doesn't work, and we're just repeating it. And that's history repeats itself if you don't know your history, and that's really, really sad and very frightening. And it doesn't matter how you communicate it to people. If people are scared, then fear is a strong emotion, and fear is what's driving a lot of people. So that's what's amazing about the kitchen, is people come over, cook, love, meet friends. It's about compassion, dignity, and people go away and go, oh, we can do that. We can do it. And I've been part of it, and I'm going to go away somewhere else, and I'm going to set that up, and I'm going to do this. And that's the only way that I think we can move forward in the real reality of what's about to take place worldwide, and stop listening to our governments who think we're all idiots, and they want, this whole repeating of things like small boats and Rwanda, and just like, don't want to talk about it, because all I'm doing is reinforcing a government rhetoric, which is rubbish, and that's another thing that happens, that you find on social media, that people will repost things going, oh my God, look what the government's doing, and don't realize they're reinforcing what the government's saying. So we shouldn't even be sort of involved in the narrative that's coming from these governments that are run by capitalists, arms industries, oil industries. Just stop repeating what they're saying. And, our governments are really quite small, and the population is quite big. And that's what we need to do. We need to join the dots within our populations and go, actually, I'm going to ignore, I'm not going to repeat their rhetoric. I'm not going to honor them with doing their job for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just carry on with making it a better place. Organize the people in small, and that's the other thing that happens with the kitchen. We teach people how to organize. They're like, oh, that wasn't that hard. I can go and organize somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I can go and organize about food. I can go and organize about, lots of things. As soon as you teach people, which we're not taught at school, we're taught to be individuals. Whereas actually we need to be taught how to organize. We need to be able to be taught about money. We need to be able to taught about food, fundamental things that they actually don't teach us about. And organization is one of those things. And as soon as you get a community, whether it's a housing co-op, whether it's your local tenants association, whether it's in a kitchen, it's like that whole ability to start organizing yourself and become self-sufficient and look after your community takes the power away and brings the power to where it should be, which is in your hearts, with you, with your community, and for you to be in control of, your basic living standards, your schooling, your education. It takes a village. It's that classic saying, it takes a village. And, we need to create our villages, and that's the way forward for me.
Yeah. There's kind of two things are coming to the forefront for me as you're speaking, these two stories maybe. And one being this story that is rooted in fear. That is a very dominant narrative for people. And this other is this story that I'm starting to see emerge, which is the story that you're trying to tell. I think about like old and new stories, and that's why taking the time to reflect and be informed. Like, I think what you're talking about is so important, because you can look at history. Like you said, you have to look at it so you don't repeat it. You can look back and say, how did we get where we are? And you can try to understand it. And there's a lot of ways to learn from your past, the patterns that have gotten us where we are. And then you can look at where you are now, say, okay, well, what do I want to be doing instead? Or I guess first saying, what's going on right now? What has happened? What is happening? And then what do I want to happen? And starting to really see yourself as this participant in the world. That's so important, I think, to see yourself as someone that has choices and power over your social world. And so I love hearing you, very first thing you said, just for regular people who believe they can make a difference. And here we are 10 years later. So I'm curious, like I said, we're already kind of dancing all around it, but in your words, what is the story that you are hoping to tell people through the work you're doing about empowering people to believe that they can take action and make a difference?
I think we've said it in bits all the way through. So I think for me, it's about empowerment of the individual, but empowerment to know that you're part of something. We do fall back onto this individual situation that we have, whether it be Instagram or Facebook, or this self-importance that's been created by this sort of trend of social media. And I'm important. It's just like, we are important, but we're not more important as the next person. And if we don't understand that our importance is only as strong and as powerful as the unity with the next person to make things happen, we're just all standing on ivory towers. And that's not going to, they're so fragile. And so this self-importance and self-entitlement it's a very dangerous thing. And people don't understand it, but we can start seeing it with young people and how it's affecting their mental health. And, to be content with being part of humanity, it's a difficult one to put your hand on, because we all aspire to do change and make things and aspire to improve. And, but that should be accountable. That should be within reason, that you don't aspire or grow at the detriment of somebody else.
Right.
You need to be able to, with love and compassion and spread and people can often say, oh, you're really strong. I just hate that. I don't want to be strong. I don't have to be strong. I just want to be part of a community that works together. We don't have to be strong like it's a good thing. It's like resilience is another word that I don't like. Resilience. Why are we using the word resilient as though it's something good? Our communities, our people shouldn't have to be in a place where they have to be resilient. Our communities should be in a place where they feel held and nurtured. And if something's going wrong, there's support for them. And, we shouldn't have to be resilient. We're rich. The world produces 2.5 times as much food as humanity needs, yet there's something like 47 countries on the edge of famine. And we talk about we see these little clips about how resilient these people are, and they're traveling this and they're traveling like it's a good thing. And it's just like, it's actually really insulting. It's just,
they wouldn't have to be so resilient if the system wasn't screwing them over in the first place.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like we're viewing it like it's it's like a Truman show. It's just like, oh, look at this. These people are so resilient and look what they're putting up with. And aren't they amazing? And these people are traveling and these children are, being bombed, and these people but their resilience is they're still going. It's like, that is just mental. That is just so dark and just very dark, that whole sort of narrative that's going on. So the story for me is about, yes, be strong in your community, but don't have to be strong as a person to make things happen. It's just the misuse of the language. And so, I've done things over the last, I don't know how many years, that if I'd known I was going to do those as a younger person, I'd have been like, oh my God, if that's what's in store for you, I think you need to go and, go in a different direction. It's about, I'm in a relationship with humanity. And I think if I can't do something that's going to improve somebody's life, as well as look after myself, I'm not saying I'm a martyr. I still have my... I go on holiday and, there's no martyring going on here at all. This is just about making this normal, that people do step out and care, and people are willing to step up. And actually, when you set up projects where you're helping your community, the growth within yourself is the only place you'll get it. You don't get it when you go to work at the bank and you leave the people or they go to the bar afterwards and crack open their champagne and you go home on your own. That's not where it's not healthy. It's about being in service and being in a relationship with humanity and knowing that that's my place. I don't expect it to be any different. And maybe I would have aspired when I was younger if I'd been brought up differently. I don't know. But the importance of being part of the community and being held by the community or holding parts of the community is the story that I want to be involved in.
So all of my work is rooted in this theory of communication, that's CMM, coordinated management of meaning. And we don't have to get into all the theory parts of it, but there's some really great like nuggets in there that are actually really, I think, tangible and applicable. And so that's kind of what a communication perspective is to me. It's that like practical part of this theory. And so I put on my communication glasses is kind of how I think about it. And it shades how I see things. And one of the tools that's in this theory is what's called the hierarchy model. And it's about our contexts, and specifically contexts, plural, to say, we're shaped by so many things. The choices that we make and who we are shaped by so many distinct layers of context. And so you have your sense of self, you have your interpersonal relationships, your families, you have peers, your society, the culture you're in, the world that you're in. And you can kind of name all these different layers of context. And then getting back to that choice part and what I call the meaning making, that you are a person who can decide how you want to show up in your social world. That's when I think you can step back and look at those layers of context and almost make a conscious choice about what you want your highest level context to be. So another way of talking about that in this conversation for me is to say, right now, a lot of highest level contexts are colored by fear. They're colored by a scarcity mindset. And, the few who are benefiting from systems that oppress everybody else, really wanting to protect that. It's like companies, a lot of their highest level contexts are profit. We have to make profit. And so we don't really care if we're destroying the environment in the world that people are living in. And so the shift that I hope can happen for individuals, and again, would be so great if that could happen at the organizational and systemic level as well. But at least to start small for individual people, if you can say, okay, my highest level context is the humanity, like what you're talking about, this shared humanity. It is not us versus them. Like the, story you told earlier, you could be thriving and feel very safe. And then something could happen and it could be you. It's not us versus them, not versus, or us and them, the separateness. It's us, we all together. Like you're saying, need to look out for each other. And so the kind of, at least what needs to happen internally, in my perspective, to spur this external action, like what you do, is this shift in what we're motivated by, what context is driving us, what are we placing as this highest level, most important motivator. And when it is something like the shared human dignity and a responsibility to our neighbors and to other people, then that's when the Refugee Community Kitchen gets created,
Yeah, like I say, it's the relationship with the humanity, but also teaching people that you don't have to be that 100% of the time. It's just standing up when you can and when you've got the time and the energy and the space, but it's just about being kind. You don't have to like people to be kind.
Yeah.
I don't, that whole thing of, well, I don't like them. It doesn't mean you can't be kind or help somebody on their journey, because, I would hope if anything happened to me that community would be there for me as well. And that's also what people need to realize. And that fear of self, of protecting yourself all the time, and a lot of people have been left high and dry by their societies because the community is gone. You see it a lot in London, and you might see it in big cities in America. It's just like you choose your family because you've had to migrate for work, or you've had to migrate for various reasons. So those networks have gone, so you create your own communities, and sometimes that's very isolating if you don't understand the people that you've ended up in that area. That's not what you're used to, or so it's also that whole, like I say, it's about being kind. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to carry on with that person or stay in that world with that person, but you just help that person on their journey or through that time. And kindness doesn't cost anything. It's not coming out of your pocket. It's not coming out of your rent or it's none of that. This is just about how you would like to be, the old adage of treat people like you want to be treated. But also what I find is a lot of people that we come across that volunteer, we have corporates that come and volunteer for us. They get 2 days a year that are allowed to come and volunteer. And how many of those people have never volunteered before, and they come to the kitchen and do a couple of days, and then they sign up out of their corporation. They go, I love that. I felt like, it was tangible. I cooked a meal. It went out onto the street. People ate it and they felt better for it. And it's, and how many people have never been in that world where they've had to offer something. And I think also, another thing that's really something that I wouldn't know how to put it actually, but religion. So in Calais, how many religious groups came to help us? Whereas I was very anti-religion on a large scale, on an organized scale. Everyone's allowed to be whatever religion they want. I respect it and I'll honor it. But on a sort of organized scale, I grew up with this issue about it. But that's changed. And maybe not on the big organized sort of side of it, but the amount of religious groups that come as, they'll come for a weekend and they'll come from a church or they'll come from a mosque and they'll all come in, and just the love and care that's created within those groups is a different type of community. And I understand more now why people go to these sort of institutions for their communities if they're not finding it where they're living. And that's become very evident as well over time. But then people have familiarities with other people, and then they form their own groups. And it is pretty, whether it be religion or whether it be a festival group or whether it be people from a youth scene, it's there, and those groups and communities, but it's quite nuanced and quite small groups. And we need to spread that love a little bit more.
Yeah. This is going to be a ridiculous thing to say in this conversation, but I'm thinking of the idea of mutually assured destruction, and that you're kind of getting at something that is the opposite, this mutually assured taking care of each other. And that's kind of, that you're saying, I'm showing up for you, not because, I need you to show up for me, but in the hope that this kind of space that we're creating together, this kind of community, which, like you're saying, doesn't always just happen. It's kind of this intentional thing about the spaces that we create for ourselves, the relationships, communities we create really matter. The tone that we set shapes how we feel like we can show up to them as our authentic selves, or as, people who feel like we can share our stories.
Yeah. And also showing up without expectations or something in return.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get at, that it's not, I'm helping you so that you help me when I need it.
Yeah.
But I'm helping you because I feel this obligation to you as another human person who deserves to be treated well, also knowing that you would do the same for me. Again, if that can be the highest level context, then wow, like the communities can really, really change. And I'm thinking that I'm so glad to be able to include this conversation as part of the series on migration, because the 3 other conversations I've had have been very different than this one, talking about most specifically immigration, which, in the United States is its own very politicized issue.
Yeah.
And something that has come up in those conversations a lot, along with the, stories, is the same seed of shared humanity. And if you could just see it up close, if you could just know people who have immigrated, because so many people that have opinions about immigration don't even know anyone who's immigrated, or don't think that they do, or don't know the stories of real people. And it's the shared humanity that is at the core of a lot of it. And so it's interesting to include this conversation as well, to kind of zoom out globally. And again, one of the conversations I had, we talked about migration broadly, the history of migration, that people have always moved. And what I think we're talking about today is people have always moved for a number of different reasons, sometimes choice, sometimes not. And the reality for people is so different. And it matters that, people like you and your organization are able to show up for people and not say, like we said, not say I'm taking care of you because, I know you, you're my friend, or you're my neighbor, you're my relative. You're a totally random person I've never met before. And I'm still putting first your humanity and the dignity that you deserve, and being guided by that.
Yeah. Every day. every day. I think the older I get, the more I'm in service. And, as an older woman now, I find myself in service in different ways. I mean, that's a whole different subject. You've gone from being childbearing and a wife and a mother and all this kind of thing to an older woman that has lots of knowledge that you can share and you can guide and you can protect, and you become the elder, and that's becomes another step of your responsibility to humanity, because you have got older and you've seen patterns, and you've seen, and your responsibility as an older woman to guide younger women and younger communities, and and it is something that's fundamentally at my core. And I know that with the other founders, that being in service to other people is fundamental in their core as well. And I think that's what's why we're so successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking that as we kind of wrap up this conversation, a sort of practice in existing in that complexity is that I want to, as our, last moments, hear about, because you said, you've been in this work for so long, you're standing where you are 10 years later and, decades later of your whole life doing all the work that you have done. What can you look back and see that you are proud of about where you are now, or the ways that you're like, what positive change have you seen as a result of your organization? But also I want to know about what still needs to be done, or what your hopes are for the future that have yet to have happened yet.
Interesting question, because we've also come to the conclusion, I come to the conclusion, as we serve so many transient populations, and we get a lot of people that want to know what our impact is. And we get it a lot. Funders, what's your impact? What's your impact? And we don't know.
Right.
Because these people are on the move. These people are transient. These people, we might serve them for 6 weeks and then they're gone. On the streets, it's the same with homeless people and whatever. We don't ask them any questions. It's without judgment. So we don't collect data. We don't ask people about their lives. It's not our business. So, and for me, that's even more fundamentally important, that we're willing to step up to people without knowing what the results are. Obviously there are immediate results. The people aren't hungry, they sleep better. The nutritional value of the food makes them, and mental health better, and makes their health better. There's those immediate effects, but like I said earlier, there's always going to be a need for a safety net. And we are that safety net. And I don't think that it's not equatable to anything, because like I say, It's so transient. And I'm so proud that we don't have to be in a situation where we can give statistics and say how we're benefiting this group and how this other person has, because everybody in the world wants answers and wants fixes and wants some impact, and has improved people, and are people in education now, and are people doing this now? Doesn't matter. We're dealing with a population on their journey, and we're there to support people on a journey. And that actually, the more we do it, the more pride I have that we're there as a safety net, and we're not one of those groups that has to have results and impacts and prove what we've done that made somebody's life better. We know when they walk away from the table and they've got a hot and nourishing meal and a cup of tea and a pudding and something that reminds them of home or their mum or whatever, that is it.
Yep.
In a nutshell, that we've improved. It might be for half an hour. We have people come up to us and have told us that, with tears in their eyes, that the food has taken them back to a place where they were before. And we've had, people come back to us and tell us that, without us, they wouldn't be where they are now. And we do have a lot of that said to us, but that doesn't equate to a permanent, that's just somebody on their journey. We've helped people on their journey. And it's as simple as that. And I'm so proud that we are able to help people on their journey, and we don't know where they're going to end up. We don't know where they've come from. We're just there at that space and time to help them. And that is something I'm so proud of, because it's a gap, and it's something that, and it goes back to this capitalist sort of system, that if you're doing something for somebody, there has to be a return, whether that return is, they're better, they're now in work, they're now in a job, they're now, they're now paying their taxes, they're now doing, that doesn't really equate to why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You're hungry, I've got a meal for you. And it's as simple as that. And I'm so proud that is what we do.
Yeah, I appreciate you putting it like that, that it's kind of like the value is in the moment and when you're meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
And speaking into whatever the need is in that moment in a, kind of very present way, I would think.
Yeah. Like you say, it's in the moment. Like, we might never see that person again, but for that moment in time, he knew or she knew that somebody cared, that there was a bit of hope, that, we were there for them at that time and place. And what's more important than that?
Yeah. Well, Janie, thanks so much for everything today. It's so wonderful to talk to you and hear all about the work you do.
All good. All good. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Janie. At the end of each episode, I like to offer questions to reflect on, which acts as a next turn so the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. Today, the questions I would have you think about are: how do you show up for your community? How do you show up for people outside your community? And what could we do together if we were all committed to protecting the human dignity of all people? And in addition to the questions inspired by today's conversation, do also think about the 4 conversations of this series together, now that we're at the end and wrapping it up. Think about what you're taking away from having heard these conversations in context with each other. I certainly didn't plan it this way, but I'm struck by the strength of this through line that kept showing up, of the shared humanity being at the center of all of this. And I mentioned it in a few of these conversations that it fits really nicely into CMM's hierarchy model. So I think that's a helpful way to conceptualize what we're talking about here. To me, it's helpful to have this visual to really think about where the change needs to start. And this is getting to such a foundational piece that within each of us is where we need to make this shift. But also going beyond that, it has to happen culturally and in our organizations and governments and systems, that we can also consciously make the choice to shift our priorities. And to me, that's the impetus for action and policy change and taking care of each other. That's where the better social worlds start. So I think we have a lot to think about after hearing these 4 conversations. So I invite you to give yourself some space to really sit with them. And once you do, you're welcome to reach out to me to share any of your reflections. And I do know that that's a big ask, that these are complex conversations that might make us feel and think a lot of things. But still, even if it's a week, a month, a year after the episode's been released and you have something you'd like to share, I still invite you to do that. The door is open for us to stay in dialogue in this way. Other great ways to stay in dialogue are to follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, and most importantly to me, share episodes with people you'd like to invite into the conversation. I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to create the space for more conversations that move us toward those better social worlds we hope to create. Other initiatives at the CMM Institute include the Cosmo Activities, which are a line of social emotional resources that are available for free at www.cosmoactivities.com. You can now check out the most recent edition, which is the Cosmo Teens comic book, designed to empower young people in talking about their own experiences of mental well-being with each other. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and all the other initiatives at the links I've provided in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.